Admiral Zethar stood on the observation deck of his sleek starcruiser, watching as the small human colony beneath him appeared like little more than a scattered speck of light on the surface of a distant planet. His mission was simple: to observe the humans for a few days and assess whether they were worthy of being absorbed into his growing intergalactic empire. He had seen many worlds and species throughout his long career, and each time the decision was easy, but something about this mission felt different. There was something oddly intriguing about humans, a species so young in the grand scale of the universe, yet so quickly advancing. Zethar's fleet was known across the stars for its unmatched power and cunning, and he himself was a commander with decades of experience in space warfare. The idea that a species such as humanity could pose any real threat was laughable at best, yet there was something about these humans that made him pause, a slight unease. He couldn't quite place something in their nature intrigued him even now as he scanned the human settlement below. His fingers danced over the control panel as he observed their activities. The humans were bustling like ants, scurrying about their daily lives, busy and unaware of the fleet that loomed above them. After a few moments, he turned his attention to a small house near the outskirts of the colony. A faint light flickered in a window, and he saw a human child sitting alone in front of a holographic display. The child was focused entirely on what seemed to be some sort of simulation game, a simple thing really to Zethar's experienced eyes. It appeared like an innocuous little diversion, yet he found himself drawn to it, curiosity gnawing at him. He couldn't remember the last time he had been interested in something so trivial. With a wave of his hand, Zethar activated the long-range sensory equipment on his ship, zooming in on the child's display. The simulation was a starship battle, a common pastime among humans, designed to mimic the complex and dangerous world of space combat. The child was sitting on a padded chair, fully immersed in the experience, controlling the starship with quick and fluid motions. The holographic display projected a massive battle unfolding in front of the child. Enemy ships appeared from all directions, and the child moved the ship in evasive patterns with astonishing precision. Zethar raised an eyebrow. A child no older than 10 was navigating the simulated battle with ease. The child's hands moved swiftly over the controls, as though they had been doing this for years, without a hint of hesitation. Each decision was calculated, each move deliberate. The child was not simply pressing buttons at random, but was actively engaging in the strategic complexity of the game. Zethar watched as the child directed their ship into a series of evasive maneuvers, using the environment of the simulation to its advantage. It was like watching a seasoned fleet commander at work. He leaned forward, his interest piqued, wondering what was going through the child's mind. As they guided their starship through a hostile galaxy, there was something about this display that made Zethar uneasy. It wasn't just the skill on display, it was the depth of understanding behind it. He had seen similar tactics in battle, but never in someone so young. Zethar leaned closer to the observation screen, watching intently as the child continued to command the virtual starship. The simulation had escalated, and now the child was up against a far larger and more dangerous enemy fleet. Yet there was no sign of panic. The child's fingers danced across the control panel with remarkable precision, the starship darting through the virtual space, dodging incoming fire and returning fire with deadly accuracy. The alien admiral felt a surge of discomfort. The movements of the ship were too exact, too purposeful to be the work of simple luck or random chance. The child's gaze remained fixed on the screen, their eyes sharp with concentration, as though they were living the battle themselves. Every movement seemed to have a purpose, every shift in direction a calculated decision. Zethar's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. This was no ordinary game. This was something else entirely. As the child's ship narrowly avoided a powerful enemy blast and retaliated with a perfectly timed shot that destroyed an alien warship, Zethar's unease grew. The tactics the child employed were sophisticated, too much so for someone so young and inexperienced. Zethar had studied warfare for centuries. His own species had spent generations mastering the art of combat in space, but never once had he seen a tactical mind like this, not in any race he had encountered, not even in the most advanced of species. The child's maneuvers were both inventive and effective. They were using every advantage of the simulation in ways that mirrored actual battle tactics, the very same tactics Zathar had used in countless campaigns against hostile forces. His fingers twitched slightly as he replayed the child's moves in his mind, attempting to pinpoint the precise moment when everything clicked into place. But there was no mistake, the child was good, very good. The simulation grew more intense, the enemy fleet was relentless, but the child did not falter. They adjusted their strategy, in real time anticipating the enemy's next moves and exploiting their weaknesses. The starship weaved through fire with such fluidity that it seemed almost like an extension of the child's own. Will Zathar found himself holding his breath despite himself. There was something captivating about watching the child fight, not just because of the impressive skill, but because of the raw instinct that seemed to fuel their every decision. Zathar had always believed that instinct alone was a weak foundation for any commander, but now he wasn't so sure. It was a brilliant display of tactical genius, and something that suggested the human mind was capable of far more than he had given them credit for. He had assumed that humans were simple creatures just starting to reach for the stars, but now it seemed that the very core of their nature was driven by a hunger for victory and an innate understanding of combat. Zathar couldn't help but wonder if this was a fluke, or if every human possessed the same natural ability for strategy as the child before him. The thought gnawed at him as he watched the child's ship narrowly escape destruction once more. As the battle raged on, Zathar's attention never wavered. The child's mind was sharp and decisive. With every move, their mind absorbed the information of the battlefield and used it to their advantage. Without hesitation, they made choices that were beyond the realm of simple play. They weren't just playing a game, they were engaging in war. The child was learning the language of battle in real time, and Zathar felt the first stirrings of doubt in his mind. He had underestimated humanity completely. The battle intensified as the child's ship faced wave after wave of enemy ships. Zathar could see the child was calculating each move with the precision of a master tactician. The simulation had shifted from a simple battle to an all-out war. A massive fleet of enemy warships descended upon the child's lone starship in overwhelming numbers. Zathar observed with growing interest. As the child did not panic, they didn't rush their decisions, but instead remained calm, assessing the battlefield with the focus of a seasoned veteran. Each decision the child made seemed more deliberate, more informed, as if they had years of experience in the art of warfare. The child didn't hesitate when the enemy ships began to converge on their position. Instead, they took a bold risk. The starship dove toward a nearby asteroid belt, using the dense rocks as a shield. The child ordered their ship to weave between the obstacles in a flawless display of precision. Zathar watched as the child expertly maneuvered the ship through the maze of asteroids, barely avoiding incoming fire. The starship's shields shimmered from the barrage, but held strong. It was a move that Zathar had seen only the most experienced commanders make in actual combat. As the battle continued, the child's ship took more hits, but each time the child adapted their strategy seamlessly. Zathar felt his mind race as he replayed the events. The child's movements were unlike anything he had expected. This was not just a simulation, this was real-time strategy on a level that should have been impossible for someone so young. With each new wave of enemy ships, the child responded with a new tactic, a new adaptation. They used the environment to their advantage, drawing the enemy in close, and then striking with precision when the moment was right. Zathar's eyes narrowed as he tried to process the information. There was something deeper at play here, something more than just quick reflexes or random luck. The child was thinking several moves ahead. They weren't just reacting to the situation, they were controlling it. They were commanding the battlefield in a way that reminded Zathar of himself when he was first starting out his career. The same hunger for victory, the same instinct for survival, the same drive to outsmart the opponent at every turn. The simulation was reaching its climax now. The child's ship was heavily damaged, but the enemy was not without its weaknesses. Zathar watched as the child calculated the risk and then made a bold move. They fired on the enemy flagship, using the remaining energy reserves to deliver a crippling blow that destroyed its central reactor. The enemy fleet faltered at the loss of their flagship, and in that moment the child took full advantage of the opening they had created. With one final maneuver, they wiped out the remaining forces in a single decisive strike. The simulation was won. Zathar sat back, stunned. The child had done the impossible. They had defeated a fleet of superior firepower with nothing but tactical brilliance and ingenuity. He felt his respect for humanity grow in that moment. What he had witnessed was no longer a simple game. It was a reflection of humanity's true potential. They were not the simple creatures he had once thought them to be. They were something far more dangerous, far more capable than he had ever imagined. The child stood up from the chair and stretched as if the battle had been nothing more than a casual exercise. Their face lit up with a smile of triumph, as if they had just completed a routine task. Zathar watched them in silence as the child casually spoke to themselves under their breath. The words were simple, but they stuck with him. "This is just the beginning." The admiral couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. Zathar remained silent as he watched the child stand up and stretch. After the simulation ended, the display flickered off, and the child turned toward a nearby table, absent-mindedly picking up a drink, as if they hadn't just completed one of the most impressive tactical displays the admiral had ever witnessed. The casualness of the child's actions left him more unsettled than the battle itself for a moment. Zathar didn't know what to think. He had watched the child face impossible odds and come out victorious, each decision calculated, each move precise. But now the child acted as though it was nothing more than a simple game, a pastime to be forgotten the moment it was over. The admiral's mind raced. He replayed the entire battle in his head over and over again, trying to find something, anything, that might explain what he had witnessed. Could it have been luck? Could the child have simply guessed their way through the entire simulation? But no, there was no luck here, only skill and instinct. At every turn, the child had responded to the enemy's movements with the kind of foresight that only comes from years of experience. Yet the child was no older than 10. Their mind was sharp in ways that Zathar had never seen before. He began to wonder if it was possible that this was not a fluke, that perhaps every human child possessed this kind of talent for strategy. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. The child had used maneuvers that Zathar himself had relied on in real battles against some of the most advanced species in the galaxy. The thought that humanity could be so naturally skilled in warfare was a concept he had never considered before. He had assumed that they were a primitive species with no real understanding of combat, but now he wasn't so sure. The child picked up the drink from the table and took a sip, humming to themselves. As they turned back to the display screen, the simulation was over, but the child seemed eager for more, as if they were just getting started. Zathar couldn't help but feel a pang of uncertainty at the back of his mind. He had come here to assess humanity, to determine if they were worth the effort of integration into his empire. But now he wondered if it was something far more complicated. If humans were capable of this kind of tactical genius, what might they be capable of once they fully understood the intricacies of war and command? He stepped forward now, his presence finally noticed by the child, who glanced up in surprise, but did not show fear. Their gaze was steady and calm. Zathar couldn't help but marvel at their composure, even in the presence of an alien admiral, the commander of a fleet that could obliterate entire worlds without breaking the sweat. The child had no fear, no hesitation. There was only curiosity and a hint of playful challenge in their eyes. Zathar regarded the child for a moment before speaking. "How did you do that?" His voice was low and steady, but there was an edge of awe in it. The child blinked at him for a moment, clearly unbothered by the question, before shrugging casually. "It's just the game," they replied. "I've played it a lot." The simplicity of the answer struck Zathar harder than he expected. He had watched the child outthink entire fleets and overcome challenges that would have defeated a seasoned commander, and yet the child treated it as a game. Zathar stood in silence, struggling to process what he had just witnessed. The child's confidence was palpable and unsettling. They had shown him that humanity was capable of much more than he had ever imagined. What began as a simple observation had turned into something far more complex, something that made the admiral question everything he thought he knew about the humans and their place in the galaxy. Zathar stood motionless for a long moment, his mind whirling with thoughts he had never expected to have. He had seen the child's skill with his own eyes, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, that there was more to uncover, more to understand about humanity's potential. His thoughts were interrupted by the child, who now stood up and walked over to a small set of controls nearby with the same casual confidence as before. They sat back down and activated another simulation with a few simple taps of the screen. The interface lit up, and a new battle began to unfold before them. Zathar watched carefully. This time the child seemed to be deliberately picking a more complex scenario. They had chosen a large-scale battle between two fleets, a clash of titanic ships, each with its own strengths and weaknesses. This was not the kind of situation where luck would decide the outcome. This would require strategy and foresight, something Zathar had seen the child exhibit before, but now he was more intent than ever on watching their every move. As the battle began, the child's first action was not to charge headfirst into the fray like many others might have done. Instead, they moved the fleet into a defensive position, waiting patiently for the enemy to make the first move. Zathar's eyes narrowed as he recognized the strategy. It was a classic maneuver, but executed flawlessly. The child was drawing the enemy in, making them feel overconfident, and then setting the stage for a counterattack. When the time was right, the enemy fleet slowly approached the child's forces, and in that moment, Zathar could see the child's eyes light up with understanding. They had baited the enemy into the perfect position. Now was the time to strike. The child's fingers flew across the controls, issuing orders to the ships in their fleet. The move was swift and precise. The enemy fleet was caught off guard as the child's ships surged forward from their defensive positions, flanking the enemy on both sides and delivering a crushing blow. Zathar was stunned. The battle had turned in an instant. The child had outsmarted the enemy with a move that most experienced commanders would have been proud to execute. They had used the same tactic the admiral himself had relied on many times in his career, yet it was clear that the child had not only learned it, they had mastered it without even thinking twice. Zathar felt a mix of admiration and disbelief. How could a child possess such an innate grasp of military tactics? What was it about humans that made them so adaptable, so resourceful? As the simulation continued, Zathar saw more of the same. The child's tactical mind unfolded before him layer by layer. With every decision, the child seemed to predict the enemy's moves almost before they made them. Every ship in the child's fleet was coordinated and effective, working together as one seamless force. The enemy was no match for their strategy, and soon the battle ended in a decisive victory. The child leaned back in their chair, again a slight smile on their face, as if the victory had been inevitable, as if it were just another game to them. Zathar stood there speechless for a moment before finally speaking, his voice low and filled with a rare sense of wonder. "You've done it again," he said, his tone reflecting his respect, though he still struggled to comprehend what he had just witnessed. The child turned to him, their expression neutral, but their eyes betraying a hint of amusement. "It's just the game," they replied again, as if it were nothing more than that, as if defeating fleets and outwitting superior forces was no more difficult than solving a puzzle. Zathar's mind raced. He had never encountered anything like this before. The child's abilities were beyond comprehension, and now he was left to wonder if this was simply the natural talent of one child, or if this was something more, something inherent in the human race itself, something he had vastly underestimated. Zathar remained still as he processed the implications of what he had just seen. Humanity was not the primitive species he had thought them to be. They were not a simple people who could be easily dominated or assimilated. Their potential was vast, and if this child was any indication, then their entire species might possess an untapped well of talent and instinct that was unparalleled. Zathar had encountered hundreds of races and civilizations across the galaxy, some advanced, some not, but none had demonstrated such raw and instinctive mastery of strategy as the humans did, and it left him wondering how far this potential could go. The child stood up from their seat, stretching again, As though the simulations had been no more than a minor distraction, they walked toward the observation window and gazed out at the distant stars, as if they were contemplating something far deeper than any game. Zephyr hesitated for a moment before approaching them slowly. He knew he was witnessing something monumental, something that could change the course of history. But what should he do with this knowledge? What was the next step? He had come here to study the humans, not to be drawn into the mysteries of their potential, yet here he was caught in the gravitational pull of their untold power. He found his voice and spoke cautiously. "Do you understand what you are doing?" he asked. The child turned to face him, their expression unreadable. "Of course," they replied, as though the answer were obvious. "I'm playing the game I told you." The admiral was taken aback. Their confidence was unnerving, but it was their words that caught his attention. The child had said it so plainly, so casually, yet it was clear that this was no simple game to them. The child was playing something far more intricate than a mere simulation. They were learning the rules of war, adapting to the rhythm of conflict, as though it were second nature. Zephyr couldn't help but be fascinated. The child had become so engrossed in these simulations that they were developing a mindset that many seasoned commanders would take decades to cultivate. The child was doing it in a matter of hours. Zephyr wondered how many other children across the human colonies were capable of the same feats. If this was the case, then humanity might be on the brink of something far greater than anyone had anticipated. Their natural abilities for warfare might make them a formidable force in the galaxy, and one that could either prove to be a useful ally or a devastating adversary. His mind churned as the weight of the realization settled upon him. What was he supposed to do with this knowledge? He had come to observe the humans, to gauge their worth, but now it felt like the game had changed entirely. They were no longer just a young species trying to find their place in the stars. They were rapidly developing into something that could potentially threaten the stability of the galaxy, or they could become the most powerful ally anyone could hope for. Zephyr struggled with his thoughts for a moment before speaking again. "You do not see the danger of what you are learning," he said, his voice tinged with concern. The child looked at him, now their eyes bright and curious. "Danger?" they asked. "It's just a game." Zephyr's gaze hardened. "It is not just a game," he replied quietly. "What you are learning is the language of war, the strategy of life and death. You are training yourself for something that is far beyond what you think it is." The child looked at him with a mixture of confusion and understanding, as if something deep within them was beginning to click. They remained silent for a long moment before finally speaking again. "Maybe it's a game, but it feels real." Their voice was soft and contemplative, and it struck Zephyr like a blow to the chest, because in that moment he realized that for this child it wasn't just a game, it was preparation. It was the beginning of something far more profound, something he couldn't yet fully understand, but he knew it would change everything. Zephyr stood in stunned silence as the child's words echoed in his mind. It wasn't just a game, the child had said. It felt real, and in that simple statement, Zephyr understood something crucial about humanity. He had thought he was witnessing a mere diversion, a child's pastime, but now he saw it was something deeper. It was a form of training, something primal that humans had instinctively grasped. They were not simply playing, they were preparing for a future. They could not yet fully comprehend. The simulations were not just games, they were reflections of a mindset that could lead to warfare and conquest. The admiral's thoughts raced with this new realization. The humans were learning the art of war on a level that could rival any species in the galaxy, and they were doing it in a way that felt natural to them. It was as if they had an innate ability to adapt to the rhythms of battle, as though their minds were designed for it. Zephyr couldn't shake the image of the child's hands flying over the controls without hesitation, every move made with purpose and precision. It was clear now that the humans were not just mimicking tactics, they were developing something far more advanced, and they were doing it without the need for formal training or military experience. The child looked at Zephyr, then with a quiet intensity that caught him off guard. "I don't think it's just the game," the child said more thoughtfully. Now their tone had shifted from casual amusement to something more serious. "It's not just about winning, it's about understanding what it means to fight, what it takes to survive." Zephyr blinked, slightly surprised by the depth in the child's voice. The words were too mature, too knowing for someone so young, And yet there was an undeniable truth to them, something that made Zathar pause. The child continued to stare out at the stars, their eyes distant for a moment before turning back to face the admiral. "We're not playing for fun, we're playing to learn. We're learning what it takes to win, and we're learning what it means to lose." There was an understanding in their voice, a wisdom that shouldn't belong to someone so young. Zathar felt the gravity of those words settle deep within him, and for the first time in his long career, he felt a deep unease. Not about the child, but about what the child represented. Humanity was a species with untapped potential, one that could reshape the future of the galaxy in ways Zathar had never considered. He had come here to judge humanity, to decide whether they were worthy of joining his empire, but now he found himself questioning everything he had believed about their place in the universe. Zathar had never underestimated an enemy before, but he had never encountered a species like this one either. The humans were unpredictable, they were learning at an exponential rate, and they were adapting faster than he had thought possible. If they continued down this path, their ability to wage war could become something unlike anything he had ever seen. The admiral turned away from the child for a moment, his mind working through the possibilities. What was the right course of action? Now, how should he proceed? His orders had been clear: observe and evaluate. But now there was more at stake than simply observing humanity's development. There was a real threat here, a potential force that could alter the balance of power across the galaxy, and Zathar wasn't sure whether to fear it or to seek to harness it for himself. "You're right," Zathar said finally, his voice steady, but filled with a rare uncertainty. "It's not just a game." The child smiled slightly, but it was a knowing smile, one that suggested they had already understood the weight of the situation in a way that Zathar had only just begun to grasp. He turned back to the observation window, staring out into the endless void of space, a space that now seemed far more uncertain than it had moments ago. Zathar stood at the observation window, his gaze fixed on the vast expanse of stars that stretched before him. The cold emptiness of space felt different, now heavier, as if the weight of the future had suddenly shifted onto his shoulders. The child stood beside him, their expression unreadable, but their presence filled with a quiet intensity that made the admiral feel uneasy. He had come to study humanity, to determine if they were ready for the stars, but now he wondered if he was the one who was unprepared. The silence between them was thick and full of unspoken thoughts. Zathar felt his mind racing with the implications of what he had just witnessed. Humanity was no longer just a fledgling species struggling to survive. They were something more. They had the capacity to learn and adapt with an almost unnatural speed. The child's actions were a testament to that, and the realization hit him like a sudden shockwave. Humanity was evolving faster than any race he had encountered before. They were evolving in ways that could make them a powerful force in the galaxy, or a devastating one. The child turned to him, breaking the silence. "You're thinking about it again, aren't you?" they said, their voice calm and knowing. Zathar didn't need to ask what the child meant. They were referring to the overwhelming truth that had settled over him in the last few hours. The child's gaze held his with surprising steadiness, as if they could sense the shift in his thoughts. And in that moment the admiral realized that the child understood something that he had only just begun to comprehend. He turned toward the child, his voice measured and careful. "I'm thinking about what humanity could become." His words felt strange to say aloud, but they were true, and the child seemed to understand that as well. They nodded slowly, their expression serious now. "You've seen what we can do, haven't you?" the child said, their eyes meeting his with a quiet confidence. "You've seen how we can think, how we can adapt, how we can learn and grow." Zathar didn't answer immediately. He wasn't sure what to say. He had seen it, but he still couldn't reconcile the image of the child playing a game with the reality of what they had just done. They had demonstrated an innate understanding of war that had no place in a child's mind. And yet it was there. The child continued, "We're not just playing games, we're learning how to survive, how to think ahead, how to overcome obstacles, no matter how big, no matter how impossible." There was a fire in their voice, now a passion that Zathar had not expected from someone so young. The child's words were both simple and profound, and they left him with a gnawing sense of unease. This child was not just playing, they were honing something much deeper, a skill that was rooted in the very core of humanity's nature. the will to survive, and to win at any cost. Zithar knew he couldn't ignore what he had seen, but he also knew that there was more to this than simply being impressed by a child's abilities. He had underestimated humanity before, but now he had to ask himself if he had underestimated the true nature of their potential. He had come here to observe them, to see if they were worth considering as an ally or a threat. But now he saw that the answer was far from clear. Humanity was not just a species to be controlled or manipulated. They were a force that could reshape the galaxy in ways that Zithar could not yet imagine. "What happens now?" Zithar asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The child glanced at him, then back out at the stars. "We keep playing," they said simply. "We keep learning. And we keep growing." Their words echoed in the silence, and Zithar felt something stir within him, the uncertainty, the fear, the awe. It was all there, but it was mixed with something else, something like hope. He wasn't sure if humanity was a threat or a gift, but he knew one thing for certain: they were not to be ignored.